We have these strong primary emotions, things like grief, things like anger, things like fear, even terror. We get taken offline, we dissociate, our bowels change, our immune system has a flare up or it stops working altogether. Panic attacks, very interestingly, are actually a grief response.
I can be disappointed and not know what to do with it. But now that I have, oh, this is a state of alarmed aloneness based on external forces and disappointment. Okay, now I know what to do.
Educational purposes only. What you read, hear, and see on the Autoimmune Hour, Understanding Autoimmune, and Life Interrupter Radio, and its websites, and other media outlets is based on experience only. The information should never be used for any legal, diagnostic, or treatment purposes.
Welcome, everyone, to the Autoimmune Hour. I'm Sharon Sayler from SharonSayler.com and, of course, UnderstandingAutoimmune.com. And first, if you've been a long-time subscriber to the show, I want to thank you for hanging in there. I know it's been about 3, maybe 4 weeks now since I've produced a show. So many things happening in my world, including some health issues. I'm back and I'm stronger than ever. So thank you for hanging in there with me while we work through the recovery process on so many levels. I've got an extra special guest, and she's always one that's in high demand whenever she's on the show. I wanted to talk about how we choose to respond to things. Like I said, I've had so much going on in my own life, both in my personal life, my family life, and my community, as well as now the greater world. And so I invited Sarah Peyton to come and talk to us about how we can choose how we respond to things and also how we deal with grief and the different layers of grief. Sometimes I feel when I have a flare or something, there's a period of grief. And there's also a period of blaming myself. What did I do to get myself here? So anyway, without further ado, because I know we're all excited to have Sarah Peyton back on the show, let me quickly read you her bio. She's a certified trainer in nonviolent communication and a neuroscience educator, and she integrates brain science and the use of resonant language to awaken self-compassion, and particularly in the face of difficult issues such as self-condemnation, and I'm going to add the word grief and other things there, self-disgust and self-sabotage. And she teaches in lectures around the world, and she's also the author of the amazing book, Your Resident Self book series, and the co-author, along with Roxy Manning, The Anti-Racist Heart, a Self-Compassion and Activist Handbook. Thank you, Sarah, for being on the show again.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here with you and with our beloved audience. Hello, everyone.
Oh, my goodness. I can just feel them all saying hello back to us. It's so exciting to see you. And thank you for agreeing to talk about this. It's a big subject right now, and I don't want to make light of it when I say this sort of. We always have the possibilities of choosing how we respond to things, everything around us. And that's a hard one to keep in perspective, regardless whether it's with ourselves, it's with our family, or with the greater world. And you and I were chatting a little bit beforehand also about grief. So I don't really have a question. I just want you to dive in really quick and let's talk about this topic of choice.
Yeah. One of the first things I'd like to begin with is this sort of tipping point that you brought us to when you said when you have a flare up, you have grief, but then also self blame. What's so interesting about that is that this is common for us. It's a bit like the neurons that are there that are supposed to hold us in a grief process sometimes have not been totally nourished by the people that we've grown up around and the communities that we live within. A lot of times when we feel grief, people want us to not feel it. And so they'll say, oh, just think of the bright side. And there's a silver lining in every cloud. And it's not so important. Oh, they'll say, first world problems. And so it's like there's a continual dismissal of our very natural sadness that makes total sense. And when we live in a world that has that capacity to continually try to turn the volume down on anything that we feel sad about, then what we naturally go to is blame. It's much easier. It's much, much easier. We have lots of left hemisphere getter done neurons that are very happy to assign responsibility and blame.
I never thought of about it that way. That's fascinating. To me, that because you're right. That is the automatic place that I had. What could I have done differently? I should have seen it coming. Any number of sentences that run through my brain. Even when sometimes like this, I don't know. Yeah, I could see how I played the part in the flare happening. However, those sentences run through my head even when I have nothing to do with it. Why I accept blame for it. I have
It's because it's much easier on a brain level. We have lots of those neurons. And in addition, we get a reward from blaming ourselves and others. It's
get
not,
a reward?
yeah,
What's the reward?
don't
I'm confused by the word reward.
we get a dopamine hit. I'll say that we get a dopamine hit from getting likes on Facebook and from refreshing our screen on social media to look for more likes and more interaction. Those are our dopamine. It's a driver for gambling. It's a driver for our addictions. It's a driver for our alcoholism, for our desire for success and accomplishment. And it, if we get a hit of it from blame,
Sounds so counterintuitive that I would my self-blame, my self-anger would be a dopamine thing. I would think that would be a downer, but you're technically with the dopamine hit, it's an upper?
it's never, it gives us a little spurt of energy. And feeling sad, of course, especially if it's not accompanied and if people don't want us to be sad, then it's just was heavy on our bodies. Once we get to cry, it often lightens up a lot. But if people are telling us, don't cry, don't be sad, then you don't ever get to cry and the lightning doesn't ever get to happen. But once you cry, then the cortisol begins to fade out and the endogenous opioids and oxytocin get to balance themselves. So the part of what we get to choose, we're talking about how to choose to respond to grief. Part of what we get to choose is, okay, I'm sad. Who can I cry with? Who will be my sweetheart for this grief that I have? Who will understand it? I know something happened a couple of days ago. I got on my cello lesson with my cello teacher, and we were both sad. And my cello teacher said, let's just scrap the regular schedule. Let's find your saddest cello music that you know, and we'll play it together. And we did. We played together. It was Bach's Bach in C minor, and the minor keys in music. Oh, they're sad keys. And we played it. We emphasized those sad, long C minor notes. And it was very satisfying and quite restorative. So this is probably not exactly what you were expecting.
But I am curious though, because one thing I have found with some recent external grief, should I say, is what happens when you feel there's no one to share it with, or you're afraid to share it because you're not sure of the response.
Yeah, exactly. What a good question. There we are. Now we have to figure it out by ourselves, which is hard because as humans, actually, that's what I don't know if anybody's seen that wonderful movie Inside Out, but in that movie, the little different animated figures represent different emotions. And we discover in the first Inside Out movie, made by Pixar, I think, that the little sadness one is supposed to bring people close. That our sadness is supposed to bring people close to be with us and embrace us and hold us and comfort us. So now here we are. We don't know who to call. We pretty much figure nobody's going to get this sadness. Nobody's going to understand it. And oftentimes we're right. The more, even the best people have blind spots. And we tell them, oh, I've got a little dog, for example. It's 15 years old, has pancreatitis. It's sad and also exhausting, but it's sad. And some people are like, yeah, of course you're sad. Other people just don't get it at all. They just change the subject. And we are suddenly alone and more alone when people change the subject and move away from us. So what do we do? One of the most beautiful things we can do is to begin to discover what it is that we love so much that's making us this sad, to really begin to dwell in the love. As I have a sadness about my 15-year-old cockapoo, I get to go, oh, here's the love. It's like an access point to these ways that we just care so deeply about people and animals and nature and the world.
I love that. I want to go the 30,000-foot view if we could.
Wonderful.
Some of my friends, I'm getting text messages and things like that. And they're as feeling as sad as I am, but we're all at a loss of words. And I'm just, sometimes it's not as, I'm going to use the word easy, and I don't mean that disparagingly. Sometimes it's not as easy to put your finger on what sad as the health condition of a beloved pet or a family member or even your own. Oh, I can put my finger on it. Yes, I'm not feeling well. I can put my finger on it. I don't know if it's free floating or what it's called, but from that 30,000-foot level, sometimes it's really hard to put a label on it. It's more,
Especially when it's a complex, layered experience of emotion that might have, as part of it, we've talked before in this program about the naming of alarmed aloneness, what it's like when there's nobody with us or somebody has left us. So there might be a layer of alarmed aloneness. We talked about how we can self-blame. When we self-blame, there's always shame. So shame can be a layer. Rage, fury, outrage, incredulity, bewilderment, shock, horror, dismay, revulsion, disgust. There can be so many layers of complex experience when we're looking from 30,000 feet. When it's something, I have probably fewer layers. When it's my pet who's struggling, it's slightly less complex. But all of those things can show up in any loss. Sometimes people talk about the loss of proximal separation, which I think is such an interesting concept to begin to be able to put words to. It's when you have a partner who suddenly becomes depressed and no longer speaks to you. She is right there, but they're not there anymore. Or we know we can experience it with ourselves with chronic illness, that on those days when the flare-ups are really bad, we're not there for ourselves. We're not there for our families. We might have to dissociate in order to deal with the level of pain that we're in, or there might be brain fog that just takes us away. And there we are in proximal separation. And usually in those moments, at least for me, when I'm in the intensity of it and it clears a little bit, that's when the grief really hits me, when I can see. So part of being able to grieve is being able to see. So this idea of going up to 30,000 feet and looking is an invitation to really find the things that are important and that matter to us, but this is a viewpoint that may also take us into an understanding of our own grief.
what part does shock play into grief? And is that a stage that sometimes I feel like I go into shock and then I realize later I've morphed into grief, if that's possible?
It's completely possible. So that first, for example, for anybody who's received a diagnosis of an autoimmune disorder or any kind of serious health issue, is a really easily accessible place to begin to see this pattern. So I'm using it because it might be a shared experience for many people who are listening. There's this moment where you hear these words or this diagnosis. You may not even know really what the diagnosis is yet, but obviously it looks like it's something pretty serious. And there's a kind of a pop and a ringing in your ears, and you can see the doctor's lips moving, but you can't quite tell what the heck they're saying. Sometimes it's nice to have a phone recording or a friend with us to help with that, because it can be hard to track and remember what somebody's saying when we're in shock. And what's happening with the shock is it's one of it's a dissociative state. It's an immediate protective dissociative state. And in the dissociative state, there's a flow of endogenous opioids in the brain that's flowing in order to protect us from intensity. And it's stopping our cognitive processes. If it's flowing in the prefrontal cortex, it stops our cognitive processes. If it's really big shock, it can even flow in the brainstem and give us a sense of unreality or of not quite being connected to our own bodies. So depending on the different places where the endogenous opioids flow, which is generally connected with the seriousness of sudden bad news or accident or hard thing that's happened, then when we have this flow, then it takes us away from ourselves. And as it starts to clear, as those endogenous opioids begin to clear out of our brain, which happens usually most effectively when somebody's with us and we're not alone anymore, or if we suddenly start to be with ourselves and we're not alone anymore, then the other emotions come. And often the next emotion, it's such an important emotion, is grief, because that's what was there all along. Whenever there's a loss, we have grief. So there we are, we've gotten, for example, a diagnosis. It's a terrible loss of health and self-trust. And even though the journey itself can be quite beautiful and important, the journey with our health, however that turns out, whatever it is that we're engaged in doing has its own beauty and its own importance. But as those endogenous opioids start to clear from the dissociative experience of shock, we start to discover what our true mourning or true rage or true terror or true revulsion, all of these things can be true. We start to discover them and to know ourselves more intimately and fully.
2 questions. The first one is, I began our conversation with the premise that we always have the possibility of choosing how we respond. However, what I just heard there was maybe not in the split second as your brain gets flooded with all of these different things. It sounds as if there's some time lapse or a process of coming back to that point of where I can consciously choose my response.
The conscious choice, it has the conscious and unconscious responses are so interesting and reveal so much for us. So we might make a semi-conscious choice to have some ice cream, for example.
That's one of my go-to choices is
Yes. Or we might make a semi-conscious or conscious choice to take ourselves for a walk or to play a really sad piece of cello music or to call a friend who we can trust or to sit down to really embrace ourselves and to be able to tap in to some of these really corrective emotions that rebalance us. Love, awe is an emotion that really rebalances us and is one of the reasons that it can be so sweet to get out into nature or to get to the beach and be with the ocean.
Speaking of beach, I escaped to the beach this week. And the sunset last night, I actually put it up on Instagram. It was so awe-inspiring and so healing just to sit there and watch, 10, 15 minutes of the sun going down. And all I did was breathe.
Oh, this is
But I
such
think part of it was mouth breathing because I was in awe. It was the most beautiful, fiery, pink, red, orange sunset that I've seen in a long time.
wow, I love imagining him. That's
Totally changed. And the community knows I don't normally put that kind of stuff up on Instagram, but it was like sharing tonight's sunset. It really took my breath away. And interestingly enough, that did a lot to help reset how I was feeling.
It's one of those corrective experiences. So starting to direct ourselves toward the corrective experiences is the most nourishing choice possible.
It also gave me this continuity or this feeling of I can always come and watch the sunset kind of thing.
And maybe also, when you said the word continuity, I thought of the past, like all the sunsets that you've seen and how much you love the beach.
And all the sunsets that are to come. It was a really lovely feeling of
The
the
world has not ended.
exactly. It was a really lovely feeling. And of course, breathing ocean air never hurts. I know there's a lot to be said for the salt air and all of that. That never hurts as well. But yeah, it was really nice to think about all the other things that you have, you know?
Yes. One of the things that I'm starting to enjoy, it's come slowly, as those of you who followed along with me and Sharon and heard a little bit about my journey over the years. One of the things I'm starting to feel is something similar to the sunsets, but it's like the inside of my body. Like,
Ooh, tell me more.
yeah, like I'm starting to have kind of an awe and an appreciation and an enjoyment of the Sarah-ness of me inside of me. Oh, something bad has just happened. Oh, my little dog is really suffering. I am still here. My Sarah-ness is still here. I have not died. It has not gone away. My Sarah-ness is not gone. I am still here. And so the word continuity reminded me of it, like this sense of a rich inner landscape that's a resource for me.
I
And
love that. I don't know. For me, as I get older, I know I'm older than you are. So as I get older, I just get more comfortable with the Sharonness of me. It's just take it. I don't know. I've listened to other people my age or as they age, they say it's just, you just get to this point where it's doing the best I can and take it or leave it world.
And and even more, I'd like to invite us toward some enjoyment and celebration of the sweetness of being each person who they are. Of course, I just want to name, because you guys have heard my story, trauma tanks us in this area. And because whenever something bad happens to us, we've talked about this in the beginning, the easiest thing to do is to blame ourselves. And the younger we are, when the bad things happen, the more we blame ourselves and think that we're just wrong for this world or not enough or not the right shape or not the right size or not the right smartness or not the right whatever. And when we start to say, you've heard me say this before, it's not truth, it's trauma that's telling me. It's not truth that I'm wrong. It's the voice of my own brain trying to make sense of the hard things that I've lived through. And as we begin to let ourselves recognize that the voice of self blame is the voice of having been left too alone as children to try to figure out the world, then we go, oh, the inside of me is a sweetness, not a horror, not a shame-filled cavern.
Interesting that I know we've talked about this. The show's been on for a decade, and Sarah's one of our early, it's inconsistent guests here because I love her. I love her sweetly. Recently, I had the opportunity to attend some youth sporting events.
Oh,
And what was fascinating to me was Sarah's running in my head, and
oh,
I'm examining, and I'm like noticing how some children treat other children. And I'm like, okay, I could see where the voice of, you know, you were stupid because you didn't kick the ball correctly or something like that, where the other kid would say it to the one kid. I'm like, now it makes perfect sense from the outside looking at it. As a youngster, I'm sure I heard those words too, because I was not athletic. That was not my forte, music, things like that, art, but not sports. And I heard a lot of that. Why can't you hit the ball? Whatever. And as an adult observing, I'm noticing that a lot of the At least to me, they could have been trauma making comments, or at least the seed being planted. It was like, wow, now it makes perfect sense as on the outside looking in at where all this childhood trauma comes from. Because I've talked to many people who said, but my parents were great. Why do I feel so? And they add all these different things on that are trauma induced. I'm thinking, wow, it's not just your family of origin. It could be, it can be. I've heard that many times. But so many things happen beyond our family of origin. Even these little kids are saying really mean things to each other.
Yeah. And pure verbal abuse shows up in the brain as a detectable disruption of brain health and brain patterning. You can distinguish, very odd, you can distinguish your parents being emotionally and verbally abusive from your peers being emotionally and verbally abusive in the brain. They leave two different kinds of marks in the verbal cortex. We are impacted. We know that we are impacted by what used to be that wonderful and comforting ditty that my mother used to say to me, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me, is not true,
Of
unfortunately.
little comfort.
That was comforting when I was a child.
I don't know. It was the unspoken words when I would hear that from family members was just get up, you're fine, or get over it, you're fine.
That's true. Yeah.
When you said it, I hear it. It's in one particular family member's voice.
I really appreciate that you're naming that. Yes. However it landed for us, it's not true. So we get to say, oh, yeah, of course. I remember the day I was listening to a talk show and they were just using the word stupid, every other word. They were calling each other stupid. They were calling call-ins people stupid. They were telling stories about stupid people. And I was like, that is a verbally abusive word. And gosh, as I'm listening to it, I realize it's a word I use with myself. I call myself stupid. Oh my goodness. I started to catch a glimpse. It's like we get these funny moments where we catch a glimpse of how we treat ourselves. Oh, that's not exactly what I wish I were doing. But I never really identified it before. I just, again, thought it was true because it was trauma, was an impact of trauma, because it had never been challenged. And I didn't know about truth and trauma then.
Well, so many things that we do that I didn't think about. I still tend to do it. I catch myself. But I remember years ago, I was in a situation and I used the word yeah a lot. And I was chastised. It's either yes or no. Don't, in other words, don't use the word yeah. That came to mind when you said the moment of hearing the word stupid. It's these things that we may learn from childhood or do naturally or our family of origin do, and we're not aware that it's leaving imprints and footprints everywhere.
Mhm.
It's fascinating to me. And congratulations on making that connection of hearing the words, something completely external that you're watching, and making the connection on going, oh, wow. Didn't think of it that way until just now.
Yes, yes. And then I don't know if I've talked about this before on with you, but you can stop me if I have, but I realized that I was saying, Sarah, you're so stupid. You're so stupid. And I thought, why am I saying that? What is my need? What am I trying to do? And I realized that what I was trying to do was to appease a terrible judge within me. That I was trying to say to this terrible judge within me, oh, yes, I'm guilty. Please stop punishing me. Yes, I did that. I'm stupid. Yes, please stop. And it was like, wow, it was like it was like the only clue to an invisible dynamic within me that had great destructive power.
I am always so fascinated how your brain makes connections, dear. But I have maybe an impossible question to answer, but can you walk us through what an amazing transformation to first be able to understand that there's an internal judge, or
Yeah.
some people judge us, plural, but also have that conversation in a way that is healing. a way that acknowledges what's happening and yet being able to choose different outcomes.
Like even now, getting to talk about it with you, I'm catching new glimpses, of something. It's like a multi-year process, I think, this discovery of the brain. It's why older brains are so delicious because they have had multi-year ways to begin to think about and track and understand themselves. It's very wonderful, the richness of older brains.
We have a lot on our hard drives, like a lot of files to go through.
So we have a lot more links. If I tell you a story, then it goes all kinds of places. It's very lovely. And if I tell a 20-year-old a story, it goes fewer places. They have lovely responses, but it goes fewer places because their brains are not as wired up as ours are. So anyway, just a little bit of a testimony and celebration of the older brain because they don't often get celebrated.
There are days I talk to my older brain, and I'm completely aware that with autoimmune, brain fog can be an issue sometimes and other times. And a side note, recently we had Dr. Hamro on, a sleep expert. And if you haven't listened to that community, listen to it because I found it so helpful and powerful. And he was right. I was surprised that really focusing on my sleep helped with inflammation, it helped with brain fog. I was like, okay, I cognitively knew about a community. I preach the value of sleep, and there are times when I work really hard at it and times when I slough off at it. But after,
The inspiration of hearing him
yeah,
give you new energy to turn toward it.
and insight and understanding that I couldn't take sad news, I can take what I label bad news easier when I have been gentle with myself and made things like sleep and nutrition a priority. When
Mm.
I make those a priority, my brain fog goes away. The inflammation in my body is far less.
Mm.
And when I'm not distracted by brain fog and or pain and inflammation somewhere, it's so much easier to make better choices about taking better care of yourself and responding to the world around you.
And choosing the walk on the beach over the third helping of ice cream for me.
Yes. Or the self-sacrificing of listening to a friend rant and rave, and you're like,
Oh,
honey, I sympathize, but I can't change a thing.
yeah. Yeah.
Or asking them lovingly. Sometimes I have to monitor myself, guys, 'cause sometimes it doesn't always come out lovingly. But lovingly.
And
And how can I support you? Because that's the only thing I can say. Sometimes there's things are so far out of our control
and
that
yeah, and we can help the more we have those early unconscious contracts that make us try to give our nervous systems to other people. Because that's one of the things babies do is they love the people that they came to be with and they just want to give them everything. And so we just, oh, mommy, take my nervous system. I will feel things with you. Then if we've got those contracts and we've never let them go, then our friends ranting and raving is 14 million times as hard because our own nervous system is getting fired up instead of just being able to be like, oh, yeah.
oh, wow. And or currently if your own nervous system is fired up and then someone else throws fuel on the fire with their fired up nervous system, you could have a whole bonfire going before you know it.
That's so true. So the self-care and the choice and the being able to say no and to say to your friends, oh, I love you and I cannot talk about this subject with you. My stomach just hurts too bad. And then just being able to have those choices is such a sweetness.
I want to go tangential because I had never heard you talk about us giving the babies, us giving our nervous systems to our parents or caregivers. As adults, do you have some tips on what we can do to unravel that or embed or untwine it, whatever the word would be?
Yeah, absolutely. Those of you who've been with me and heard this before, you'll remember the unconscious contract work. So if we say, it's such an odd thing to do to say it out loud, but if we say, For example, I, Sarah, solemnly swear to my essential self to, now I'm just going to feel into this because I can tell I still have something. My mom died some 10 years ago, but I can still feel like the way that I was connected to her. That I swear to my essential self that I will erase myself and make room for my mother's experience within me in order to fully understand and love her and help her survive, no matter the cost to myself. I can still feel the imprint of it. And then we see, because once we've made words out of it, we've never put words to it before. When we put words to something we've never put words to before, then all of a sudden it moves its location in the brain. The unworded rules that we carry within us about our nervous systems are located quite deep in the brain, in the basal ganglia, in the habits section of the brain. And so if we start to name them, when we give really good words to it, and we're like, oh yeah, I do that. And there's some sort of physical experience of yes. Sometimes it's tears. Sometimes our ears turn bright red. Sometimes something flutters in our tummy. And we go, oh, that was a good one. Do I want to keep now? Now that my body's involved in saying, yep, we do that, we get to ask, do I want to keep this contract? Do I want to leave my nervous system at the disposal of my mom, who now is dead, and anyone else who comes along who reminds me of my mom? Do I want that? No, I don't want. I don't want to erase her anymore. I don't want to push her off to the side and clear her out in order to stabilize the people that I love. They got their own work to do to stabilize themselves. It's not my job. I release you from this contract. I revoke this vow, and instead I give you the blessing to watch with interest.
I love this. You and I have shared unconscious contracts for a decade. And I know you've been studying it far longer, but when I started the show, we started sharing it. And I end up guilty. I was always putting it to very specific things, like when my family member said X or my teacher said Y, very tangible, specific memories, things like that. You could do it on a much bigger scale, or because I had never thought about giving away the whole nervous system in such a way. But it makes perfect sense with all the study that between you and I and the other people I've worked with on the autonomic nervous system. Now that you're giving words to it, I'm really sparked and charged here, because this is, to me, just like the next layer of being able to heal the autonomic nervous system. And the one thing that I've always been surprised is how overlooked the autonomic nervous system is, because, hey, it's always there helping us breathe, etc., right? It's always behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And so we don't acknowledge how powerful it is in making choices, good or bad, or choosing helping us choose how we respond.
Yeah, or regulating our habits and habitual. Yeah.
I never thought about in specific situations. I've always been very specific and never giving it a larger embrace of how something or someone I could have an unconscious contract with something even larger.
It's also really fun to work with. It's fun as a word I use for deep transformational work that gives us a good result.
I love fun. I love playing. I always say I'd much rather play with a concept or an idea. So play with unconscious contract ideas.
Yeah.
Because my brain, when it hears the word work, it's, oh, tomorrow.
Only if you're interested, only if you're sparked a little bit. Do you have a sense of what I did one that was true about me. Do you have one that was true for you about what your nervous system tries to do?
My nervous system is really, I don't know if it's my nervous system. You'll have to help me explain it. I'm really good at ignoring and avoiding.
Oh,
That's
that's
something I've learned over the years really well.
I've learned situations where you don't want to ignore and avoid, or does it work really well for you? Because this is the thing about unconscious contracts. We only want to change them if they interrupt or disrupt us in some way.
I've been thinking about that a lot, because there are certain things that just a matter of time. Pretty soon you have to make a decision one way or the other with certain things, right? You just got to move because that's the time.
Yeah.
I always say time always wins. It does. And so you have to turn left or right at some point in time. Yeah. So it's fascinating to me is, do I have one? There's a specific thing I could say I'm avoiding or ignoring right now off the top of my head. But what I have noticed is the reinforcement that now named it. I named it a while ago and made this vow to, okay, get better. Just make a decision. You're going to learn to live with the decision regardless. And the reward has been pleasantly surprising because more often than not, it's been the right decision.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And I'm going to say the right decision for me. And it
Yeah.
seems a lot of the times, going back to my first gut feeling on it, that first kind of snap decision I made, and then I stopped myself because, hey, it might not be correct. It might not be politically correct. It might not be anything like that. After all that circling the drain, so to speak, I usually come back to my first, or yeah, maybe I have to polish it a little bit because maybe I want to use some bad words or something. Maybe I have to polish it a little bit. But my first instinct, so I find that has been really helpful in reinforcing now that I'm making decisions quicker and not ignoring things. It's just get it done, get them checked off the calendar in your brain and move on.
There you go. That's really cool.
I know it's nice to have those reinforcements though, and be sure. And I like to give myself little true pats
Yeah.
on my back every so often. Family and friends look at me sometimes weird because I'll just look up to the sky and go, thank you. If something works out the way I wanted it to, I like to throw gratitude out there wherever. Just make sure that there's plenty of gratitude. And that's one thing, the older I get, the more important. I've always known about gratitude and I try to be grateful and I try to send thank you notes, all of that. But the older I get, the more there's a deeper appreciation of being kind, A, to the world, and B, to yourself, or A and A, I guess. I don't want to give them any difference, but definitely kind to yourself and appreciating yourself, appreciating everything that your body is still doing and everything that it's learned. That's the key importance to me.
Out with awe.
Yeah.
And gratitude is another one of those resets. It's one of the reset emotions, like awe is, that we can bring as a part of our intentional, that intentional reset of our human body when we're experiencing something like grief. We can also name the gratitudes that we have. It can really help with resets.
We're just about out of time. We got about 10 minutes. I'd like to talk a little bit about grief and resets and just whatever's on the top of your head today.
Oh,
Because it's always so fascinating. I love wandering around with Sarah in her mind. It's one of the most wonderful experiences.
oh, let's see. What seems important? Let's just recap a little bit and see if there's anything that's bubbling for us. We have these really strong primary emotions, things like grief, things like anger, things like fear, even terror. And we can tell that they're really strong because of the way that our body responds. We get taken offline, we dissociate, our bowels change, our immune system has a flare up or stops working altogether. Panic attacks, very interestingly, are actually a grief response. We can tell because, yes, this was a discovery of Yikes. People always think that the panic attack is some kind of fear, but in fact, the thing that helps panic attacks is things that address alarmed aloneness, especially alarmed aloneness.
Yeah.
And so we have these, we can tell we're having strong emotions because our bodies are like upset and our cognition often will be just fine. Oh, I'm coping really well with this. This is a shock, but I'm coping really well. But then we have diarrhea and then we're like, okay, maybe my body is not coping quite as well as my cognition is coping. And then we get to begin to do the self-care processes. So we started out with, can we get accompaniment? Is there somebody in the world that will hold us emotionally, physically? And that's a really good starting place. Of course, as we can have contracts that tell us that even if somebody's very good at holding us, we really shouldn't go to them because we're supposed to take care of these things ourselves. we can let go of some of those contracts. But here we are now in the area where we're alone and we don't really have external resources. Now we want to know what are the things that provide us comfort and resets? Does music provide comfort and resets? Are there flavors or tastes that provide comfort or resets? If we move into prayers, often a hugely important reset because it brings us into connection with something greater than ourselves. And when we get to go into connection with something greater than ourselves, our brain gets to settle. It's like maybe we can't be held by another person, but maybe we can be held by a sense of God or Buddha or Jesus or Mary or the great green man or whatever kind of Christian or Muslim or Buddhist or Jewish ideas or pagan ideas might support us. And so that's a possibility. Just being in nature, we mentioned that and the way that can change us. Sea air, forest air can really change us. The experience of being in awe now, we're starting to move towards those openings that we can intentionally bring us toward that allow our brains to be changed. The awe of the sunset that you saw last night, the awe of the ocean waves crashing and crashing, the awe of the patterns left on sand. But for those of us who live in the city, it might be the awe of the iridescence on a pigeon's wing, or the awe of a street full of people with umbrellas. We don't have to limit ourselves if we can't get to the beach. We don't need to be limited. In the suburbs, it can be the awe of the way the sun catches leaves in a neighbor's yard, or the sun filtering through the window and different shafts of light. Then, so we have prayer, we have awe, and we've now named gratitude. What are we truly grateful for? What are we celebrating? How did we stand up when we got down? How did we keep going even though we suffered this loss? What is it that we can turn ourselves toward with intentionality that might have the possibility of helping us? Meditation is another possibility that we can choose intentionally that allows a kind of a reset. Box breathing. Breathing in for a count of 4, holding it for a count of 4, breathing out for a count of 4, breathing in for a count of 4. These kinds of things are other intentional actions we can take. It can be very calming. Another thing that I rely on constantly is cold water, drinking cold water or splashing on my face with cold water. Just the experience of there being something that exists outside of me that reminds me, perhaps, takes me toward these huge resources that we were talking about. Love, a sense of delight in our own being, a continuance and sustained sense of existing. How did I do, Sharon?
Oh, fabulous. I know we're running out of time, but I do want to talk. And through all that was beautiful. And I had this moment of awe and aha. As I came into this conversation today, I've been feeling profound disappointment. I like to say one of my things always about disappointment, and it's a generic thing I've said for years. And often it's like, I'm not surprised, I'm disappointed. And making sure that I name it what it is instead of surprise, because surprise is not helpful. But here and listening in the last few minutes of you talk,
Oh, so good.
because you can be disappointed and not know what to do with it. At least I can be disappointed and not know what to do with it. But now that I have, this is a state of alarmed aloneness based on external forces and disappointment. Okay, now I know what to do.
Oh, so good. I feel goosebumps.
So in just the last couple of minutes, can you redo the definition of alarmed aloneness so people can understand? Because I'm working from 10 years of working with Sarah, so we have the shorthand. So can you give a definition of alarmed aloneness so people know what that means?
Yes. Well, when we're alarmed as humans, we're often scared, usually scared for our financial well-being or scared for our physical safety and health. We can also be upset when we're angry. And then in both cases, when we're scared and when we're angry, our heart rate goes up and our blood pressure goes up and our respiration rate goes up and we have more muscle tone. But there's another state that we rarely talk about where we can be upset. And that's the state of missing somebody. When we miss somebody, when somebody disappears suddenly, you can think of a little child being lost in a big store. They can't find their mommy. Now, there's stuff about that's scary, but there's also the experience of, well, my mom's gone. And the heart rate goes up and the blood pressure goes up. It's alarmed aloneness. And we can have this alarmed aloneness throughout our life. Loneliness has this quality of kind of just being like a long-term, steady kind of thing. But alarmed aloneness speaks about the suddenness that can happen with loss of somebody's died, so there's a divorce, we've lost a job, we've moved across the country, we have a kid who's moved out to college or moved out to get their own apartment, and there's an alarm. The space is empty. We're not scared. Our kid is doing good things, but our body is alarmed because the person that we love is gone. And we have a cellular need for people and warmth and for our people and for warmth with our people. And we miss it. And when we miss it and we have alarmed aloneness and blood pressure goes up and our heart rate goes up and our breathing gets faster, that's a little bit of how did I do with thinking?
Great. I want to ask a yes and question. My yes and question is, the explanation was beautiful and very individualized. What happens? Is it alarmed aloneness when you feel like a larger community that you thought was there is not there?
Yeah.
So it's the same. It's not. It doesn't have to be like your
Right.
mom or your son or whatever.
Oh,
Okay.
we have a shared dream with other people and the dream doesn't come true. Then there can be a huge alarmed aloneness for the loss of everything that we've dreamed about. And it can be like alarmed aloneness that we can also share with a large number of people. If a dream that a large number of people share disappears suddenly.
I think we'll leave it there. Any final thoughts that you want to share? And then we've taken up so much of your time. I just always bless you for sharing all of your wisdom and knowledge and helping us explain our responses. Sometimes when we bring this unconscious responses to the consciousness, it's so much easier to deal with. You go, oh, I get it now. Okay. These are some conscious, concrete steps I can take to be more productive or be more whatever, be more comfortable, maybe whatever the choice I want to be.
Yeah. I just want to say that getting to be with you and having these long time discussions over years is a great joy and pleasure for me. And it helps me in a world where I can often feel alarmed aloneness.
Me too, dear. Me too. And thank you, community, for sharing with us. Write down in the comments anything that comes to your mind. I'd love to know, Sarah. I'd love to know. And also, if you haven't and you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe. We're trying to grow the community over on YouTube as well. And so we can share our messages about you are not your diagnosis and you're not alone. And let's all heal the world together. That's my message today. So everyone, have a great week, whatever your adventures. And thank you for welcoming me back after my short hiatus there. It feels great to be back in the saddle, so to speak. And see you next week for another brand new show. Enjoy.
The information provided is for educational purposes only. What you read, hear, and see on the Autoimmune Hour, Understanding Autoimmune, and Life Interrupted Radio is based on experience only. The information should never be used for any legal, diagnostic, or treatment purposes.